Hello, everybody out there. Welcome to our class today. Uh, we're going to get started in just a moment. I usually like to give a little time for people to sign on. Just want to take this time right now to introduce myself to anyone who's new. So my name is Elliot Friesenmeyers. I'm the IELTS expert at Magoosh. And I've been teaching classes here for the last couple of weeks. We did a little bit earlier in June, and now we've released live classes as a permanent feature of our subscriptions. So we will have live classes every week for our Magoosh students. And to kind of celebrate the launch of our new feature, we're also inviting in folks from YouTube. So we're streaming this live out there on YouTube. So welcome to all of you who are there. And welcome to all of you Magoosh students who are here in the Zoom call. We're going to go through today a bunch of different stuff, and I'll have you working on a few things as we go through it. Mostly here, we're going to be talking about speaking band scores and trying to think about how we can understand the difference between a sort of average score, a level 6 band score interview, and a much higher scoring interview at band score 8. So we're going to be analyzing a little bit what goes into, what are the differences between scores at those levels. And then we're going to be analyzing some student responses as well to kind of try to put the concepts into use. The goal today, the reason why we're doing this and the way this ought to benefit you is as we look at these sample responses from students and sort of consider the concepts in the scoring rubric that are really important to understand, you should be able to get a sense of how one interview is clearly marked much higher or lower than the other. And then you should also be able to begin thinking critically about your own speaking responses and some of the characteristics that we might be able to identify that you can hopefully use to work on any weaknesses you might have that are keeping your score lower than you want it to be. Okay, so that's the goal here today. I'm going to ask everybody, we've got a nice big group forming. We've got people joining here as well. If you have questions, I'm going to try to get to questions as much as possible throughout the lesson here today. I'd ask that you please put your questions in the chat so that I can see them there. And if the questions that you ask are clearly related to exactly what we're talking about at that time, then I will probably answer it right away. And if not, then we'll save some of the questions for later, and we can hopefully have time at the end when we can talk about those things. Okay, so last thing here, if you stick around for the whole class, we've been doing this, like I said earlier, since this is sort of, these live classes are a new feature for us. We're kind of celebrating that. If you're around at the end of class, we're going to do another giveaway where we're giving away speaking grading. So we've got a speaking grading feature now that we also released, so Magoosh students can get some interviews graded by Magoosh, and we're going to give away some free speaking interviews to a lucky student. So stick around to the end of class and we'll announce who that is here at the end. Okay. All right. Good. And I see some questions coming in already. Good. And the question is about fluency, and that's great. We're going to talk about fluency coming up in just a little bit. So let's get to that when we get to it. And if you have a specific question that come out of fluency, Pranav, I see your question there. We can address it at that time. Okay. All right. Let's get started here. So and I've almost forgot an important thing. So for the students here on Zoom, I'm going to record this session so that you can look at it later, and so that we can share it with anyone who's not here. So let's see. I've got to record. Good. So now we're recording. the session, as always, and I know everybody knows this because I can see everybody's got their camera off. You don't need to put your camera on to the session here at all. We'll be recording here, so you can watch this later. All right, got that set up. And hi, Malika, I see you in the chat as well. Welcome. Hi from, I am in Portland, Oregon right now, and Malika, you're from Iran. It's great to hear from you, and it's exciting for me that there's students all over the world joining in here. It's such a unique thing. Anyway, let's get started with our lesson here today. So we're going to jump right in with thinking about band scores. And what I wanted to do was to contrast for you the 4 different categories that you're graded on for the IELTS interview. And I wanted to kind of paraphrase some of the concepts that are on the band score rubric, IELTS official rubric. You can see down below, there's a link to it there. Here, I can put that, oops, let me escape out of here. I'll put that link in the chat. If you want to open, excuse me, if you want to open this link, you can. That could be helpful as a reference for this lesson. But what we have on the screen here is, there we go. What we have on the screen here is sort of my own paraphrase of some of the language on the interview to try to clarify some things that sometimes students are uncertain about. So we're going to start with fluency and coherence and just think about the concepts a little bit that they're looking for. And then we're going to look at some example student responses that exemplify some of these characteristics that we're going to be discussing here. Okay, so if you're on YouTube, you can look down below in the description, these links to things. The link to the band score descriptors should be down there for you to click. All right, so jumping in. Fluency and coherence, what are they? Well, fluency is your ability to speak at a normal rate of speed without having to have lots of frequent pauses and hesitations, especially hesitations where you are trying to search for the language that you need to complete your sentence. We all feel this when we're speaking a language that is not our own. You recognize these moments where I remember speaking Spanish when I was really a very beginner Spanish student. I had, enough language and words and phrases to start off into my idea that I wanted to express. But sometimes you get into that middle of a sentence and you realize you don't have the word that you have in mind in your own language to complete the thought that you have. And so what do? Well, you rely on other words that might be similar to the word that you are trying to say. But anyway, in all that time that you are spending thinking about what to say, or maybe it's a grammar, you're not quite sure how to formulate the grammar of what you're trying to say, you lose fluency. Okay, and so that's what we're thinking about here. And so at the band score level 6, someone who's going to score a 6, they are capable of speaking at length about almost all of the questions that the interviewer asks you, even the difficult ones in part 3, you're able to say something. But at the band score 6 level, there's going to be occasional repetition. Okay, so you're going to repeat words and ideas because maybe you can't quite get to that next idea. You don't have the language to continue the sentence in a fluid way, in the same way you might in your own language. So you have some repetition, you have some hesitation, some pauses. And these pauses and hesitations, importantly, at the level 6, they can cause you to, what you're trying to say, to be less clear to the listener because you're kind of not being as precise, you're stopping, you're hesitating, you're putting a lot of time to think about what you need to say. And so it causes loss of meaning here, okay? So at the band score level 6, that's kind of the characteristic that we're looking for at that level. Also, the second point in band score 6, you make some errors with connectives. Connectives is kind of a complicated topic. I think probably all of you out there are very familiar with the idea of transition words and phrases like, for example, or first, next, later, whatever. Some of these transitions that we use to introduce concepts and logical relationships when we're talking or when we're writing. But there's more to it than that. Connectives can also be things like using pronouns to refer to ideas that you mentioned in a previous sentence. Someone who's very fluent in another language or in English will be able to use those kinds of connecting devices where you refer to ideas in a previous sentence very fluently. And we're going to look at this in just a moment in the examples, right? But building ideas as you are speaking. So it almost feels like you could draw an arrow through the ideas. It moves from one idea to the next in your sort of paragraph that you're talking about in your response to the questions. Everything flows from beginning to end. In someone who is at the level 6, they might have some errors and some trouble doing this. And so again, what we see from band score level 6 responses is that there's going to be some repetition and maybe some ideas are not connected very clearly. We kind of, as a listener, we have to sort of fill in the gap of logic or the gap of information that's there that's missing from the student's response. Again, we'll look at this in just a second. But by contrast, band score 8 students don't have this difficulty with fluency, right? They have very minimal repetition and self-correction. They don't need to take all of that time to sort of think about what to say and to get the words and the grammar correct. They don't need to search for language. The ideas are very clear and coherent. Again, when we look at samples of band 8 responses, we can see that the ideas, there are no gaps in logic. As a listener, I don't need to fill in information, and the ideas seem to flow from one sentence to the next very logically. Okay, so this is kind of the theory. This is what's behind the band score rubric. Okay, these are the concepts. Now let's look at some examples. And I want to do samples today in 2 ways. Okay, so first, I know we're talking about speaking, and it will be beneficial for us to hear some responses from actual students, and we're going to do that at the end of the lesson today. But I thought for clarity here, I thought it would be, to demonstrate the concepts, it would be better to look at some responses that we can read and that we can really spend some time with thinking about. Okay, so here's what I want you all to do out there. Okay, so I'm going to give you a moment. Here is a sample response to an IELTS interview question from an actual student, and I took the language and I put it up here on the screen for you to take a look at. I want you to read through there, and obviously we can't get a sense from reading how quickly or how fluently the student was speaking here in this example, but I think we can get a sense of some of the concepts that we were just talking about coherence and about repetition and about being able to, having your ideas flow from one to the next using connectives effectively and some of those kinds of concepts here. So what I want you to do, take a minute. I'll give you a minute. I'll go silent here for a minute, and I want you to read this paragraph. And then just in the chat, I'd love for you to just put a quick note or a sentence or some idea about, well, what do you think this student's main issue with fluency and coherence is based on what you're reading here? Okay, what do you notice in the text? All right, so take a minute, read it carefully, and then let me know what you think might be the issue with this band 6 response and how this student might be able to improve in this particular category. Okay, so 1 minute. I've got my little stopwatch here. All right, so go ahead and read it now, and I'll come back in a minute and we'll talk about it. Oops. Good. Okay, that was my alarm. All right, so I'm seeing some responses come in from folks. So let's take a look here. Let's look at what you said. So for you folks out there on YouTube, I'm looking in the chat for the Magoosh students who are in the Zoom and some of their responses that they have here. All right, so I see some things. Some words are missing. The third sentence could be better structured. Okay, good. We'll look at that in just a second. Range of vocabulary, errors. Okay, good. Some of these things are correct, and we're going to look at them in a moment. We'll look at vocabulary separately in just a moment. Thinking now about the fluency and coherence. Okay, Sandeepa, I see your comment. Thoughts are not well connected. They are scattered everywhere. Yeah, I think this person, as you're reading, you know, the response, I know what they're talking about. I get the sense of it, but I think there are some gaps in the logic here. We'll look at that also in just a second. I agree with that. All right. The reason, good, Aslam, you pointed out a problematic sentence. The reason I enjoyed this book was because of the author's thinking. Okay, well, what do we mean by that? What do we mean by the author's thinking? How, you know, I could have some guesses about what that student is talking about, but it's not exactly coherent there. I don't really know what connection the author's thinking has to the rest of the comments that are there. Good, I agree, nice. Grammar and flow, lack of cohesive devices. Jose, I see your comment there, good. Yeah, there aren't really very many effective uses of cohesive devices in this, and it causes some lack of clarity, okay? So let's take a look here at what the student actually does. So, you know, if people are mentioning grammar and vocabulary, we're gonna look at that in a second. Absolutely, there are some issues here, not huge problematic mistakes that really get in the way of understanding, but some issues, yes. But mostly the language is pretty solid in this one, maybe a little basic, but what we have here, the main issue is that the student struggles with the ability to connect ideas together and use connectives and to not repeat him or herself over and over some particular vocabulary, right? So let's take a look at it. A book I really enjoyed reading was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I really enjoyed this book because the author's thinking is amazing. The book is about, okay, do you notice how many times the speaker is saying the book, the book, the book? This speaker, this response is not using connectives, not using pronouns to refer to the ideas that were just mentioned, right? It almost feels like every sentence kind of starts over with the same concept of the book, the book, the book, over and over, right? So this is something you should watch as you are doing your own responses. Record yourself and listen to yourself. And if you are repeating the same words, or if your sentences have the same subject over and over and over again, that is a problem. That's a problem with coherence and your ability to speak in a fluent way where the ideas flow from one to the next. Okay, so this particular response has that specific problem, and it is bringing this person's score down. Okay, so let's continue. The book is about, the characters in the book. Okay, this person started with an idea, changed their mind, that's fine. Now we're on to the characters, which is actually good because we're getting away from the book as the subject that has been repeated over and over. The characters in the book, again, take a tour of a chocolate factory with special places where people eating everything around them. There are also funny parts in the book that some children getting in trouble because they do bad things. Okay, some grammar mistakes there, but we don't have a sense of progression. We don't have a sense that this idea, this concept of why this book was really enjoyable is fully described. Okay, do you have a complete sense of what was really enjoyable to this particular person about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? Well, yes, a little bit. We know that they think it was creative. We know that there are funny parts, but we don't have a really direct and clear response to the question. Okay, let's contrast that with this. Here's a band 8 response to the same question. Okay, again, it is not, this is not a perfect response. We're going to find issues here, but this one is much better, especially in this category of fluency and coherence. So now let's take another minute. I want you to have a chance to read through carefully and take a look and compare this, what we've been talking about, this category of fluency and coherence with what you just read in the band 6 example. Okay, so I'll stop talking. 1 minute to read this, and then we'll discuss it in just a moment. Okay, so go ahead and read that through. Okay, that was a minute. Hopefully that was enough time to at least get a sense of what's there. So I hope you can see this one is better, right? The ideas are more, first of all, the response is clearly a more direct and clear response to the question about why the book was enjoyable. In the middle, the speaker mentions that in the third sentence. We get that. I especially liked the section in which we're talking about things that this person likes about the book, and it's a very clear response. But more subtly and more importantly, there is a really strong coherence in this response as well. Let's take a look at it, right? So a book I especially loved. Oh, here's another thing I forgot to mention. Look at this beautiful paraphrase of the question, right? And so instead of saying enjoyed and repeating that language, we've got a little paraphrase here. It's not complicated. It's not fancy words that you wouldn't know, but this person was able to do it in direct response to the question. And that's great. I love it when I hear students doing those kinds of paraphrases, because it means that they have been practicing that skill and that you are really thinking quickly on your toes about what the interview question is and how you should respond there. So here's a good example of that. A book I especially loved was Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. In it, okay, what a small thing, but what a nice improvement over the band 6 response we just saw, that little in it, right? Our band 6 example, The person kept saying the book, the book, the book over and over and over. But this speaker is using pronouns to refer to ideas that were just mentioned a moment ago. And that is more advanced. And they are looking for that as they're scoring your responses. They want to see your ability to do this using connectives and use references well, right? So let's continue. He tries to explain why certain trends seem to take off and spread quickly. Take off, a nice phrasal verb there. We'll look at that later. Spread quickly throughout society. I especially like the section in which he discussed certain types of people who have they have a powerful effect on the spread of ideas. For example, a connective, a one that we are all familiar with, but this speaker thought to use it and it added clarity because this person was able to communicate. I'm going to give you an example of something in the book that represents the concept that I'm talking about now. It helps me as the listener understand the flow of ideas here. And so another example of how this person is using connectives effectively. Okay, for example, he describes some people as experts about topics like restaurants. These kinds of people. There's another connective. These kinds of people. These people, that demonstrative pronouns there, referring to an idea that was just mentioned in the sentence before. This is what we're talking about. This is the kind of thing that makes the difference between a band 8 fluency and coherence score and a band 6 fluency and coherence score, okay? So these kinds of people can influence others to behave a certain way. The ideas Gladwell writes about shape the way they look, the way I look at people in society, which I find fascinating. Okay, all right, what do you think? Pretty connected, right? Pretty fluent. Now we can't, again, we don't hear the people. We don't have a sense of how much they're stopping and starting, okay? We'll listen to some examples later that will exemplify that kind of hesitation and things like that. But I hope you can all see that the ideas here are much more clearly laid out and they flow nicely from beginning to end because of the use of connectives that this person at the level 8 has mastered and is capable of doing, where the level 6 person is just needs to continue to work on that set of skills. Okay. I see a question in there. Do we have a band 9 example as well? I don't have band 9 today. Today we're focusing on band 8 and band 6. And that was partially just so we could have clarity around the concepts that we're talking about today, so they would be consistent. So, but there are some band 9 examples out there that I can talk about at the end of the lesson. I'll see if I can find links to those resources that I can share with you, okay? All right, let's continue. Let's continue. So we're going to keep walking through the rubric here a little bit, and we're going to continue on with these written examples because now we're familiar with them. We won't need to spend as much time reading through them again, but they exemplify just this one piece of text from both of these speakers exemplifies the concepts that we're talking about really nicely so that we can apply them later as we're listening to some examples out loud, okay? So now going through lexical resource. So lexical resource, we're thinking about vocabulary, right? This is the vocabulary category that they use also in the writing assessment. So much of what we're talking about now here also will pertain to writing as well. Even though it's slightly differently formulated in the rubric, it's in general very consistent across the two exercises. So first of all, band 6. A band 6 response has enough vocabulary to provide extended responses across topics, but some vocab could be inappropriate. So this person has enough words to be able to talk about the various topics that they ask you about on the IELTS interview. Okay, so here we're especially thinking for someone at band 6 and higher, we are especially thinking about part 3 of the test, where they are giving you lots of different topics or topics that you probably don't talk about or think about in English all that much compared to other things like the questions you see in part 1, where they're kind of small talk questions about weather, your hometown, your family. You've got a lot of experience talking about those things probably. But later in the test, they intentionally give you things that are probably a little bit unusual to talk about. And so the question they're asking is, well, does this respondent have enough vocabulary to speak coherently about the topics we provide? And a band 6 response will be able to talk about those things and make themselves understood without too much problem, but there could be mistakes and inappropriacies there, okay? So we're gonna look at that concept in a second. All right, and here we were, I mentioned this earlier, but they're reasonably successful in paraphrasing, okay? And here, what we're thinking about here is that a student who scores lower than 6, they're going to have many instances where they're just recycling the language that they hear from the interviewer and that they read in part 2 on like the topic card that they give you and all of that. There's going to be a lot of recycling and very little effort put into actually changing around the wording of things from the questions and rephrasing it in their own language. Okay, so somebody at band score 6 level is pretty good at this, and they try it and they're successful, and maybe they make some mistakes, but they're doing it and they're successfully paraphrasing throughout their response. Okay, so that's band 6. Band 8, by contrast, uses vocabulary precisely. Okay, so precise use of vocabulary. So they're using not only words that are understandable, they're using the right words, the words that make sense, that are clear and exact and precise for the meaning that they're trying to convey, all right? So they also are able to use less common and idiomatic language well, okay? So this doesn't mean that every single response you have in your interview needs to have idioms and phrasal verbs and really uncommon kind of academic language. Not every response needs to have that. It would probably be weird and unusual in like part 1, for example, if you're using a lot of really fancy words in there that seem unnatural for those kinds of questions, right? You don't need to have lots and lots and lots of fancy words that you just learned, a couple of weeks ago as you're studying vocabulary. But you do need to show that you can use vocabulary precisely and that you have a range of words that you can use to describe things. That's why they evaluate paraphrasing so much, because paraphrasing really is being able to express an idea in a different way than what it was presented to you before, like in writing or in speaking, right? So that requires a range of vocabulary. So anyway, that's why that belongs here in this category. All right, and a band 8 scoring response is effective at paraphrasing. Okay, so let's go back. These are the concepts. And here I wanted to point out a couple of things here that I would underline as being important considerations for lexical resource, all right? And so take a look at this. I've underlined a few words and phrases that I think are not very precise, okay? That the speaker could have done more if they had more vocabulary ready to go. They probably would have been able to be more precise with their language here. So let's take a look here. In this first sentence, a book I really enjoyed reading was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I really enjoy this book. Okay, so we've got really lots of redundancy here. I really enjoy this book because the author's thinking is amazing. All right. I'll ask all of you, what do you think the speaker means here? Do you have a sense of what the speaker is trying to say, that the thinking is amazing? I see a hand raised. I mentioned this earlier. If you've got responses, let's put them in the chat today, just because we get into some complications with microphones coming off. So if you've got a response here, why don't you type it up in the chat there? Okay, so the author's ideas are excellent. The attitude, yeah, right. Okay, so this could be about attitude. It could be about the ideas that they're mentioning. Anybody else have a thought about what this speaker might mean here? The thinking is amazing. What else could we be talking about? Oh yeah, so Pranav, I see your comment in there that the author might be talking about imagination. Playful imagination, Jose. I see that response. Yes. So I don't know if that's the right answer. Certainly imagination That's kind of what I was thinking, but I honestly don't know exactly. We don't know. We would have to talk to the person who did this response. But I think we could all agree that if we would replace thinking is amazing with something like imagination, or playful imagination, I love that. Attitude, thinking about attitude, thinking about how they are, maybe if they're talking about how smart they are, maybe that's a possibility. And so we could talk about, how the writing shows off the author's intelligence in some way. Okay, can we all agree that that improvement is related to vocabulary? It's an example here where the speaker was not precise with their language, and we would imagine some improvements that we could add, right? I see another comment here. I think the speaker means the author wrote the book is unique. Yeah, okay, good. So good, your improvement ideas here, all of these would be excellent feedback for this particular student, right? Hey, I don't know what you mean here. Could you clarify that? And let's think of words that you could use to say your idea more clearly. Okay, so do this with yourself. When you are practicing speaking, if you're practicing by yourself, which I know many of you are, you should be recording your answers and then going back and listening to your vocabulary choices. Are you using the precise words? Do you come to a sentence where you could think of a little bit better word in your native language that you you're not certain if you got the word precise in English? Well, those are good moments to explore vocabulary that you could use to communicate your ideas more clearly, okay? So, hope this example shows that here. Okay, I see another comment here. I think the speaker should link his or her words to the context he or she's talking about. Yeah, good, and that can be a coherence and fluency issue. That can also be a lexical resource issue as well, okay? If we look some other points here from this particular response, some other areas where the words are not as precise as they could be. Special places, okay? In a factory, what are some, can we think of a better word than special places for this? It doesn't need to be fancy word, but what? Special places is so vague. I don't know exactly. What kind of special place are you talking about? Well, we could have different words, right? Even if we used, offices, if that's what I don't think that's, I've read this book. I know that it's not talking about office rooms, but an office is something you find in a factory. There could be a warehouse. I think there's one scene in this book, if you're familiar with it, where they go into a warehouse kind of room and it's filled with stuff that people can just pick up and eat all they want. It's all candy, right? So that word would be an improvement, right? Interesting location, fun places. Yeah, various places. Yeah, maybe, okay. But I think place, I'm trying to suggest that we move beyond place here, because that place, it's not wrong. And it's okay if you say this, okay, it's not the end of the world, but we're trying to think about, okay, what's the difference between this and a level 8 response? And I think that generic sort of idea of places is kind of not getting this particular response to the place it could be if we had more precise vocabulary, okay? There's some other things I circled here. Right at the end, so at the very bottom, the kids get in trouble because they do bad things. Okay, so could we be more precise about what the kids are doing here? Okay, this isn't wrong. It's not bad. I understand what they're meaning, but remember what we're talking about here. For Band 6 in Lexical Resource, you have enough vocabulary to talk about this and be understood and speak at length about something, but it's not, some of the vocabulary isn't precise, and it's not, as in some cases, appropriate for the context, okay? And so that's what I think we're talking about here. I understand, I think, what the speaker means, but he or she could be much more precise, okay? So can anybody look here? Oh yeah, I'm seeing some examples come in the chat, that they were mischievous. Ooh, I like that. They got in trouble because they were mischievous. Yeah, that gives me a nice sense that some of the kids were trying to cause trouble. I like that. I like that improvement a lot. And that's a nice fancy word too. So great. Let's take a look here. Now, again, we're looking at the same example from before. That's going to help us so we don't have to reread many examples throughout the lesson here. I think we see better vocabulary in this particular response. Could you take a quick scan through this again? I know you've read it once, but take a quick scan. Which word, can you find an example of a word that this speaker used that is an example of something that's much more precise than the band 6 response that we just took a look at? Who could find something in there? Okay, tipping point, yeah, but tipping point is the title of the book. So they're just mentioning the title there. But yes, tipping point is a nice advanced phrase. If you can use that and you know what it means, that's a good one. What else would you find in here though? What are some examples? I'll stop talking. You just take a look and then put one or two words that you find in the chat of something that's an improvement over the band 6 essay. Okay, I've got one idea in there. Okay, here comes more. Giving example, take off, fascinating, especially. There's a variety of vocabulary. Yeah, good. Okay. Good. There are some relative pronouns. Okay, that's we like that. That's good. Shape the way. Good. Okay, we're putting out good things. Okay. Good. Any more? Go ahead and put them in there if you find. Okay, so here's some things that I would pull out here from this. So let's just read through. A book I especially loved was Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. In it, he tries to explain why certain trends, makes a mistake there, grammar mistake. Certain trends seems to take off. Good, I agree with all of you who put take off. Take off is a great phrasal verb to use here, right? Take off. Take off means it's kind of, the idea is almost like a rocket, right? It goes off into space and it gives the appropriate and specific concept here that is, if you're familiar with this book, that is what the author's talking about, how certain trends just seem to spread like fire, okay? They spread through society quickly. And what is it that causes things to sort of take off and become viral and stuff like that? That's a term that has been used, right? So take off is a great verb to use. I would imagine a less advanced speaker would use a word that's more basic and more general than that. Something like how certain trends begin, or how certain trends start, right? That would be a more basic word, but it doesn't have the precise concept of taking off, exploding, right? We could use the word explode here as a nice paraphrase, a nice synonym, replace it. I think that would be more precise. And that kind of vocabulary choice is something that is rewarded with a higher score in this category, okay? So ideas take off and spread quickly throughout society. I especially like the section in which he discussed certain types of people who have a powerful effect on the spread of ideas. For example, he described some people as experts about topics like restaurants. These kinds of people can influence others to behave in a certain way, right? There's some general, a certain way is, I guess, a little general there, but there are no places here, if you read through, where I am wondering, it's not like the words are extremely fancy, right? They're not all difficult academic words, but there's no place in here where I'm feeling like, I don't know exactly what you mean, compared to the Band 6 essay, where the vocabulary use was much more general. Okay, so again, how do you use this? This is something you should be doing as you analyze your own writing and your own speaking. okay? You should be looking at your vocabulary choices very critically. And you could even ask someone else to read through your essay. And if there are points where they say, not really sure what you mean, it's an opportunity to learn and look at the vocabulary choices you're using and to clarify things from what's there, okay? Good. All right, how we doing here? There were some questions that have come in generally. I just want to remind everybody, if the question is not directly related to what we're doing here, I'm going to save some time at the end. We'll be able to talk about those things here at the end, okay? Good. All right, so let's keep moving. We've got 2 more categories here. We'll go relatively quickly through these, and then we're going to listen to some sample responses here at the end and be able to apply some of the stuff we're learning here. Okay, so now we're on to grammar. Grammar is pretty straightforward. Grammar is a complicated topic, but I think the discussion of it here is relatively straightforward for us to understand. Looking at band 6, somebody who in the band 6 is able to use a wide variety of structures, but maybe they can't do it flexibly. That's a word that they use on the IELTS rubric. And flexibly, when we're talking about using vocabulary and grammar flexibly, it means that you don't get stuck in the same sentence patterns over and over. You're able to use an appropriate sentence pattern, an appropriate grammatical choice for the purpose of the thing you're trying to say, right? You're not limited to a certain number of grammatical structures to express your ideas. You have flexibility. You can, if you need to speak about the past, about the future, if you need to use conditionals, if you need to use complicated, complex sentences to express your ideas clearly, you can do that, and it doesn't appear to be a struggle for you that much. Well, a band 6 response can do some of that. They can use, there's evidence that they can use a variety of structures, but they don't do it as flexibly as somebody who scores higher. Okay, because a band 8 response will have that flexibility. You'll see that response moving through structures easily, without too much trouble and without too much thought that needs to go into it, okay? Also, a band 6 response, they're gonna make regular mistakes that don't the mistakes don't cause really significant issues of understanding. So at this point, somebody who scores a 6, they may be making plenty of grammar mistakes, but not enough or not so serious. The mistakes are not so serious that we have a lot of trouble understanding them. If that is the case, your score is going to go down from 6. Okay, so to achieve a 6, you can have some errors. That's fine. They should not really get in the way of comprehension. Band 8 is a much higher standard for making errors and the lack of errors, right? So in band 8, we need to see that most of the sentences are error-free, okay? That there are very few systematic errors. Systematic errors are where maybe you don't have, maybe you're making regular mistakes with a particular grammatical structure, okay? So tenses, verb tenses, conditional or modal verbs. Maybe it becomes clear throughout your interview that you haven't mastered those particular skills. Those are systematic errors, and we're going to see those at lower levels, but at level 8, we should not see those things. Now, do level 8 and 9, even 9 responses need to be perfect grammatically? No, they don't. But we should not see systematic errors, and we need to, at the level 8, we need to begin to see that most of the sentences are error-free. Okay, so let's take a look now. Back to our responses. I'll go quickly through this. So we saw in our band 6 response that there were a number of mistakes. And something that's significant here is that we don't have the rest of the interview up in front of us, but we can see just from this one response that this particular student is, this particular speaker has some trouble with complex sentences, with some of the sentence patterns that go into things like adjective and adverb clauses. If you remember, if you studied lots of grammar, those terms are probably going to be familiar to you. If you haven't, then what we're talking about here are these sentence patterns that I've underlined here down below. Okay, so here we see special places where people eating, right? So this verb here is not in its proper form for this particular clause that we have here. Where people eat is the correct grammatical choice for this particular sentence, right? And they make the same error down here, that some children getting. This person is putting in the participle, the ing form of these verbs in clauses where they should not go. So this is an example of a systematic error that this student is making, okay? So there are some other things here, and if we saw the whole interview, you would see some further mistakes. But this is why this particular response would not score above a 6, is because of the presence of these systematic errors that are also getting in the way of some clarity. They're happening frequently enough that it gets in the way of our ability to understand this person. Okay, so, oops. Good. By contrast, I should also say, I completely forgot. So not only are there errors here, but what do you think about the complexity of this student's responses? Could we say that this student uses grammar flexibly, that they use a wide variety of structures and to communicate their ideas? I see some no's coming in. Yeah, I agree. Let's look at the sentence structures that we have here. A book I really like. Okay, that was actually a book that I really like, and that's a nice little descriptive phrase. They used it well there compared to lower in the response. But a book I enjoyed reading was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I really enjoy this book. The book is about. Okay, all of our sentences here have this simple sort of subject-verb construction. And in the places where the student attempted to say something with a more complicated grammatical structure, in general, they made mistakes there, right? So that's a problem, right? There's not much flexibility. There's evidence that the student can use these a variety of structures, but not in a way that's error-free. Okay, so this is why we're looking at this as a band 6 response. Compare that to band 8. So I put in red here. I underlined a bunch of things here. I put in red. This is the main mistake that this person made, right? It did not get in the way of comprehension. It's a common kind of thing that third person S, even the most advanced English learners continue to make that mistake. Maybe you find that about yourself as well. It's just one of those errors that seems to be it's something you learn in one of your first grammar classes in English, but it seems to be the hardest thing for people to get rid of, right? So that's one of the, and I think maybe somebody's found another one, but I didn't pick that up, but we can read through. If there are some other mistakes in here, that's possible. I think the main point here, though, is that most of these sentences are, in fact, error-free. Okay, and especially for speaking, right? Writing has a different standard where we look at every single word. For instances where, like in the middle, where this person has the and they sort of continue their sentence a different direction, those kinds of things don't get flagged in the same way for speaking as they do for writing. So a little bit of a difference here just looking at these words on the page. What I've underlined here, though, are examples of how this speaker is flexible with their grammar. Right? They are able to use a variety of structures, use them in an error-free way, right? And their sentences really have a nice mixture of complex and simple sentences that the speaker uses really, really effectively and well, right? So at the very beginning, a book I especially loved. Okay, there's another descriptive adjective clause there. A book we can take out the relative pronoun that. We've got a book that I especially love, or a book I especially loved is good, perfect, nice grammar there. In it, he tries to explain why certain trends seems, okay, there's our mistake, to take off and spread quickly through society. Okay, a simple sentence there, nothing fancy about that sentence structure. I especially like the section in which he discussed. Ooh, very nice. Okay, nice adjective clause there, in which, okay. He discussed certain types of people who have a powerful effect on the spread of ideas. For example, there's another new sentence pattern. We've introduced a transition phrase there. That's a nice way to mix it up. He describes some people as, okay, there's this nice little structure, describing someone as, and then you give the description afterwards. We don't need to go through everything here. This speaker is able to use these grammar structures very flexibly in a way that helps them communicate their meaning clearly, right? And so we can see the variety here. Okay, so how do we improve on this? Grammar is not an easy thing, right? And so it's not something, if you've got a couple of weeks until your IELTS exam, it's probably unlikely that you're going to make big improvements in your grammar. But if you have a while, if you've got some time before your test, and if you know that grammar is a problem for you and it's potentially pulling your score down a little bit, it can be really beneficial to sign up for a class or to do some grammar study on your own. So I recommended before some resources on grammar instruction in previous classes. I can share. I should have thought of that. I didn't think of it now. I'll try to find those at the end of our time today, and I'll put those in the chat for folks. I've got some self-study resources that I really like and can recommend to you. And so I'll put those in here at the end. I should have put them in my lesson here. So I apologize. Yeah, Malika, you were here for that class. It's the Betty Azar book. Yes, that's correct. Fundamentals of English Language, I think, is the title. I'll find that and put that here at the end for you. But there's also another resource out there, the Purdue Online Writing Lab. Here, I'll put that in the chat. Purdue. It's called OWL, O-W-L, Purdue OWL. If you go to Google and just Google Purdue OWL, that's a free resource. The Betty Azar books are not free. They cost money. You'll have to order them, and I do recommend them though, because they're really good for self-study. They've got lots of exercises and things like that you can do. But the Purdue Online Writing Lab is another free resource with authoritative and good grammar content there. Fewer exercises than the book, and that's what I like the book for, is all the exercises that are there. But the Online Writing Lab is a good place to review some grammar. Yeah, the grammar in use, Malika. Yeah, grammar in use is good. I like grammar in use for teaching classes. I think it's a little less, at least, I guess it's been a while since I've seen their most recent version, so maybe I shouldn't talk about it. But the grammar in use books, in my memory, are really great for communicative language teaching in class. The Betty Azar book is good. What I'm recommending that for is for people out there who need to do self-study. Because it has lots of practice exercises that you can do in the book that you can do on your own. Oh, okay. Anyway, I'll find that. At the very end, I'll find the sort of Amazon link to that book, and I'll put it in the chat for everybody. I do want to continue on here to our last part. And I want to go fast through this. Even compared to grammar, pronunciation is one of those things that it really is difficult to make improvements in pronunciation quickly. So it's not often something, at least at Magoosh, that we work on in a really direct way, because most people will need, everybody's got a little bit different ear and different ability to produce the sounds of another language. And it often, at some point, it often takes a coach or just a lot of time and exposure to the target language in order to really make big, important gains in pronunciation, excuse me. So it's not something I can give you a lot of tips about how to make fast improvements on, okay? What we're looking for though, very quickly, for Band 6, You're going to see some mispronunciations that impact clarity. And you're going to see the person using a range of pronunciation features, but not consistently well. Oh, Malika, thank you. You put the link in the chat there. I appreciate that. Thank you to the grammar book. Band 8, we are thinking about somebody who's easy to understand throughout the pronunciation, doesn't cause those kinds of issues, and they can use a wide range of features. Okay, so this person has really, is not difficult to understand. So do you have to have perfect native-like sounding English to score an 8 or even a 9 on the test? No, absolutely not. But you need to be able to do certain things well. Okay, and so those certain things, there's a list of things that go into this. Pronunciation is really, really, really complicated. But in general, these are the things that you could look at. Okay, if you think that pronunciation is an issue for you, then look into. There are lots of things you can find, places you can go online to work on rhythm, intonation, word stress. Okay, so rhythm. I've got a sample sentence from one of our interviews down below, right? The first sentence of the Band 8 interview. Right? And so rhythm refers to how the pace of the words that you're using, and how in English we emphasize the main word in every little phrase that we say, right? So here, our sentence here has sort of 4 different phrase groups, right? And so my rhythm is I'm going to emphasize the main word in each of these little phrase groups. A book I especially loved was Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Okay, someone who doesn't have a natural rhythm will usually say words in a very kind of robotic way. A book I especially loved was Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Right, you say words without spacing. You don't speed up or slow down on any, like on the less important words you're supposed to speed up a little bit. On the more important words you kind of emphasize them and slow down. That's what we're talking about with rhythm. Intonation is very similar. We go up and down throughout our sentences. So some students, their intonation is very flat. Okay, so a book I especially loved was Tipping Point. Okay, it doesn't sound exactly like that, but your voice doesn't, it's flat. It doesn't go up and down. In English, we go up and down. So natural sounding English, and there are some different patterns with British English and American English and Australian English, but in general, we say things expressively. A book I especially loved was Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Did you hear how my voice, da 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 da? Okay, that's intonation. The voice goes up, the voice goes down. Okay, so again, this is complicated stuff. I can't give you even a week's worth of lessons on some of these topics. They're really complicated linguistic concepts. But what I want to suggest here is if you are having trouble with pronunciation, then one thing I would recommend is to gain some awareness of these sort of things, the rhythm, intonation, word stress, sort of look into what they are and what the concepts are a little bit, and then go and listen to native speakers. Okay, go online, find a TED Talk, find, it doesn't matter, a TV show you like to watch, anything, and do some work starting and stopping, pausing and playing the audio, and try your best to copy the sounds of the speaker as closely as you can. Now, you might want to be alone in a room for this, because to do this well, you're going to feel kind of silly at first, because to really mimic the sounds of another language, it kind of puts you out of your comfort zone. You're not used to making some of the sounds that you're hearing, but you need to practice those things. You need to practice forging the connection between your brain and your mouth and your tongue and your lips to make the sounds of that target language you're working on, okay? All right, so I'm gonna kind of apologize here and move on quickly beyond this, because this is complicated stuff that, you know, if you're struggling with it, you may need to find a coach, or you may need to put a lot of time into those kinds of exercises I'm talking about, where you're mimicking the sounds of native speakers to improve their pronunciation, okay? We could consider, you know, there are some, again, there are lots of resources out there. I'll put some thought into this. I think not in this lesson, but maybe in a future lesson, we could talk about this topic in a little more detail if it's interesting to folks out there. Okay. Okay, so the question came in, how can we find the proper intonation as native speakers speak? Through shadowing techniques? Yeah, shadowing is kind of what I was talking about there. I think, there are different techniques that speech coaches use on pronunciation, and they often involve, recording students and really listening to things over and over and doing comparisons of the student's speech and their sounds that they're making and the target language, the people that they're trying to mimic. At home, you can do this kind of thing yourself. You can listen to people, you can listen to it repeatedly, get a podcast, get something with really good audio where you can hear really, really well what the sounds are that they're making, and then try to get your mouth to make those sounds. And if you're struggling, if you're aware that you struggle with a particular sound, like some students really struggle with W or the W or the TH, the, or the silent or the voiced or the sound, right? Those are common things, and you can listen to people making those sounds and try to repeat them and mimic them yourself. Okay, that would be something I would recommend for self-study here if you're struggling with that. Good. Okay, so here's what I want to do now. Let's see, how much time do we have? Good, we're at 10:06. Here's what I want to do now. I've got a link here. I'm gonna exit out here. I want to share this link with you. So here's an official IELTS response that IELTS has published on YouTube. These are available for folks on YouTube. They've got more examples of IELTS interviews that you can take a look at. What I want to do here, I'm going to share this link in the chat. Make sure everybody you're on mute, okay? And instead of playing it for everyone, that's not going to work with the audio setup that we have right now, so I don't want to play it, but I do want to share the link with you so that you can, we'll go silent for a minute, and I want you to listen to at least a minute here, or at least a few seconds of this band 6 response, okay? So in a moment, I'll tell you to start your video, and if you're out there on YouTube, you can open up a new tab and put this video in your, put the link in there and open up and listen to this particular response. And I want you to think critically about what we've been talking about in this lesson so far, about fluency and coherence, about lexical resource and grammar and pronunciation. And in the chat, as you're listening, I want you to share some ideas about what you think makes this particular student's response a level 6 response. What are some things you can point out? You're going to hear lots of stuff. You don't have to mention everything. But when you do notice one of the concepts that we have talked about in this lesson, I'd like for you to at least put a little note in the chat so I can see what you're noticing in this particular response, okay? All right, so I'm going to go silent here. I'm going to actually mute myself as well because I want to don't want to mute yet though. So go ahead and play the video that I've shared here in the chat. Oops. Oh, I didn't share the link to everyone. I shared it to one person. Hold on. There we go. Okay, so now everyone should have the link in the chat. Sorry about that. I shared the link to one of you and not to the whole group. Now you should have the link. So go ahead and play. I may stop you before it's completely over, but you'll have enough information to kind of put it in there. Okay, so play it, listen, and put your ideas in the chat now. Go ahead.
To you, one or two more general
Okay, I know that it's probably still going for you. And some people may not have caught that. I wanted you to play that link just on your computer, so apologies for that. But I think you've heard enough there. What would you say, based on what we've talked about today, what are some of the students' weaknesses that you heard that put this particular student at a band 6 that they would need to improve to get up to that band 8 level? What would you say? Put it in the chat. What did you hear? Was there anything particular? Good. Malika, I see a range of vocabulary. Yes, this student had an issue with vocabulary. Absolutely. There were many places, if you listen through again, there were many instances where the speaker was not very precise with their language, just like the example we saw in writing from earlier. There were words he used like, he was struggling to find language to describe the kind. He used the word new logics. That was the reason why he was interested in that topic, right? New logics. Well, that idea wasn't very precise. I think I know what he meant, but again, we would need more precise vocabulary in order to really get the concept that he was trying to say. Yeah, somebody said he's repetitive. Yeah, the grammar, there were some grammar issues there. How about his fluency? And coherence? Do you feel like you were able to follow his ideas very clearly? And was he very fluent? Yeah, lots of pauses. Good. And the pauses didn't seem like he was just thinking about the answer. It seemed like he was searching for the right language at certain places, right? And so that impacted his fluency. Saad, you said, I think the student has good answers, but he seems to be hesitant and has problems with pronunciation. Other than that, I think there's no problem. Yeah, the answers are good. The answers are good. I think, though, that he is hesitant. I agree with you 100%. And then I think the words that he's using, the grammar is pretty strong, actually, in that response. There are some mistakes, but it's relatively strong. But the words he's using are pretty basic there. Yeah. Okay, some other things. Accent, okay, excuse me. Lack of idea development. Yeah, I agree. I think the coherence, the fluency, coherence, and lexical resource are the big things for this particular. If I were coaching the student, we would be working on vocabulary development because I think he didn't quite have the words he needed to finish the response. And we would be working on those cohesive devices that we were talking, the connectives, being able to connect ideas clearly for coherence would be what I would focus on with this particular student. Okay, good, good. Well, I've got also, I'm going to share with you this as well. I'll put this in the chat. This is a band 8 response. We have, as we almost always do, we have run out of time here to really go over this one, but I want to share it with you anyway. I'm going to put it in the chat for everyone. Just one moment. So I'd recommend going here and go to the IELTS YouTube channel, their official channel. And look, I think they've got how many? 10 or more, 15 maybe, sample responses, and they tell you the band score level for the responses. And they can be really good study material for all of you to hear the examples of what people say, how they respond to these questions. It's also just kind of helpful to get a sense of what happens in the IELTS interview if you've never done one before. So I really encourage you to check in there, but go look at some of those example interviews, and this band score 8-1 is a good one. You should be able to see, based on the discussion we've had today, the relative differences between the band 8 response and the band 6 response. And what do we do with that information? Well, as you are working on your own interviews and you're practicing for the test, you want to be critical about your own responses in the same way that we were for these folks today. What does that mean? That means when you practice speaking, don't just don't just respond to questions and put it away and forget about it. Record yourself. When you're giving responses, you can put those recordings away for a day or two, but then come back to them and listen to yourself. Think about places you could make improvements. If there's somebody you can get feedback from about your responses, do that. If you've got a teacher or someone else if they are a native English speaker, or maybe their English is as good as yours, or maybe a little better, that would be even better. Share your work. Don't be hesitant to do that kind of thing. This is how you're going to get your level to improve, hopefully in the amount of time that you have before you need to take the test. Okay, good. How can we, one final question here, how can we find real Band 9 samples of writing and speaking? Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of free resources out there that have official things. I'm aware of some websites out there that publish IELTS tests, but they're not. I can't recommend those because I don't know actually if they are official or not responses. I think the best way to find Band 9 responses to things will be, for all of you who are Magoosh students, we try to put really good, strong examples, Band 9 examples for all of our writing and listening prompts. That's one place you can do it. But to get lots of Band 9 examples, I'm not aware of whether or not IELTS has published any officially on their website recently. They didn't for a long time. They were only providing samples. I think many of them were in the 5 to 7 range on their site. But I would turn to those. Those are still good, useful, and good for learning. But it's a good question. I'll see if I can find some more samples online, but IELTS hasn't published tons and tons of them for us to use. But we need to wrap up our session here today. We have, as I promised before, we have a giveaway today for somebody who's been in attendance here. So the winner today is Rudia. Congratulations. You should email the email address that's in the chat there, Rucha. If you can provide your email, then we can send your prize to you. So congratulations, you get some free speaking credits, Rucha. Also, for all of you out there on YouTube, if you're still hanging on with us here, we have, if you are interested in signing up for Magoosh here, I'll put it on the shared screen here. We've got a promotional code for you folks you can use to get a little discount. So if you put in, if you're signing up for Magoosh and you put in IELTS Live 20, you'll get a discount on your subscription. Okay, thank you everybody for a really great participation today in our discussion about band scores. I hope you found it useful, and continue practicing, continue coming. Tomorrow we're going to be doing another conversation club for all of you who are interested in practicing some of these things that we talked about today. So I hope to see many of you there. Okay, so anyway, we'll see you soon, and hopefully tomorrow or next week we've got more classes. Thank you all for participating today, and we'll see you next time. Okay, bye-bye everybody.